Good morning.
Hey,
Laurel.
Hello.
Oh,
Whoops. There we are. Nobody's very chatty this morning.
Well, I'm going to be really interested in this because I have a family history of Alzheimer's.
yeah, and of course, at this point, it's possible to test, to get tested and see if you uh, have inherited the Alzheimer's primary gene, the apolipoprotein E4 variant.
Do you really want to know?
When I was 50 and 60, I didn't. But now, what the hell?
What
Well,
the hell?
one thing is if therapies are more or less effective for people with or without the gene, that's potentially useful to medical decisions. And also, if you think about timing and planning for support and care. So I would want to know, as it happens, I don't have it, but um, I got tested for something else because of my sister's uh, concerns, because she has um, something that it turned out to be potentially genetic, but I didn't test positive for that either. So, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yay.
We now disclose to results to people participating in our clinical studies if they, I mean, if they want, but people can now request disclosure of results, not just that, but things like amyloid testing. So we have a lot of guidelines on how to do that. So for physicians, how do you disclose information to people, and what do you do with that from a practice standpoint? So it's an interesting challenge from a clinical practice. What do you do if you have more information about potential risk for serious diseases? And it's like the breast cancer risks from BRCA 1 and 2. So what do you do if you know you have that? And
BRCA?
I was a little unhappy to find out when I was pregnant with my daughter that my um, father-in-law's family had polycystic kidney disease, and three of his first degree relatives had died from it. And I was like, excuse me, I would like to have known. But it turned out that my then husband was not a carrier, because it was one of those, you know, um, autosomal dominant things. If you get one copy, you're toast. So
I like all that Latin language, man. It's really, it's stimulating my stupid gene.
no, this is good. So has everybody in California already voted?
Yep.
I got my ballot ready to drop off today at the grocery store. Has a drop off. Some of the small, or some of the minor things, like who do you vote for superintendent of education and things like that, which matter, but there's not much coverage of that.
This is your primaries?
Yeah, our primaries, but in
and
California with
local
such a
stuff.
heavy Democratic registration, the primary can be determinative. And we have lots of billionaires deciding that they want to just sort of parachute into elections. We have one in our local congressional district, some Bay Area billionaire who decided, gee, it would be fun to be a congressman. And, every day we get a new email from him. And he's actually, I am very progressive. I'm like super progressive, way more than um, the guy who's currently in office, who's been there for true a lot of years. So, but has voted, steadily progressive. He's not like a dino. Anyway,
Man,
so
if I
yes,
had $1 billion, the last thing I'd want to do is be a politician. What a terrible job.
Okay.
well,
Remember,
I know
remember
it's
when?
it,
I could go the
it's
other
like
way.
at one point, after I'd been here a couple of years and had been acting department head, and people thought I'd done a really good job, they wanted to send me to dean's school, and so I thought, well, this is an honor, and I thought about it for about a couple of weeks, and after a while, I realized if I went to dean school, I'd have to be a dean and deal with deans all the time, and I thought,
Yeah,
no, like why would I want to go to hell?
you remember when the joke was black man given the worst job in the United States when
About Obama.
Obama won. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, are we here? Well, it's. Let's give it another couple of minutes, Laurel, before we start recording.
sure.
So next time it's going to be me. I'm going to talk about. I'm going to do two sessions. One on general sailing stuff like wind, tides, history, and that kind of stuff. And then on the second day, I'll talk about our trip. So that's what's coming up next. And so the pressure is on the rest of you guys who haven't presented anything yet. You're not going to get a gold star in this association unless you tell us something that we don't know. So
Hey,
Fred
Tony,
mentioned something about a case he had before the Supreme Court. Leslie's already mentioned something, but I don't think is ready to do it yet. Um, so the
hey,
pressure's on
Tony,
you guys. Yeah.
Tony, I will extend an invitation to Tom Crow to see if
Oh
he
yeah,
will
yeah,
Oh
right.
yeah,
join
I
our
was supposed to
join
do
us.
that and I forgot to.
I'll
But
I'll, I'll do
I
it,
will
Fred.
do it.
I'll send him an email today. I'll copy you and Tony and see if he can do a talk or a couple of talks about the art scene at Claremont in the time we were there, which he's done for other venues. So that
Yeah.
should be. I think he'll want to do it. It's pretty. It'll be very entertaining.
If
I
he
know.
just did the one that he did for my class at Pomona last month, that would be great because that was an
But
amazing hour.
it was.
I know Brian Holmes is going to talk about the French horn, and so
How about,
Brian, yeah.
oh, I was just gonna say, I think Barry mentioned the Exploratorium when he was talking about Disneyland. What about Pete Stevens talking about it, the Exploratorium?
That'd be great.
That would be
He could
good.
do he
I,
could.
I think isn't he on our list? Can we get a hold of him?
I'm sure we can.
Someone who knows
That's a
him
good idea.
should invite him to
Who
make it to do a
who
talk.
knows him? I know him, but I'm not real well. Is anybody good friends with Pete?
Well, what's his name is up in uh,
Bob Philby or who?
Philby.
Yeah.
Philby knows him pretty well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been I gave Bilby some shit about doing a Bob Ross show, and he didn't warm to that idea. How to draw, and I think it'd be quite amusing. And he said I could talk about coins and succulents. Those are the two things. But even those he wasn't very. I said, well, succulents just gardening. Everybody does that. And
Well, if Philby would just talk about some of his adventures of his life, it would be very entertaining. I mean, he was a rafting guide on the Colorado River. I mean, he's done so many interesting things. It'd be cool if he would talk about them.
it's funny. My first reaction to you saying that was, "Don't encourage him." But anyway, I think we've got probably a quorum here. So, Laurel, or if you're ready, I'm gonna start the recording. Okay?
Okay, I will have to ask for screen sharing. Let me see if I can do
Okay.
this. I will send a request so I can share screen.
So you should be okay now.
Okay, so we'll see. Can you now see it? It's readable.
Yeah,
Yep.
Awesome. And I will not be able to see everybody's faces, so if you have questions, shout them out. So today is the third talk, and this is again trying to be a little good news-ish, given that we started with the bad news, but immunology was pretty cool. And so I want to talk about cognitive aging, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias. And so it's sort of a mixed bag in that when I started this 40 years ago, I would have almost 40 years, 39 years, I would have said, oh, in 40 years, we'll surely have perfect treatments and all kind of cool stuff. And we're not quite where I would have hoped, but we're getting there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about history and what we know about Alzheimer's, the brain, and what happens, and biomarkers.
That's okay.
Oh, somebody is,
Maxwell.
yeah, mute if you're not speaking. So I've worked for quite a long time in biomarker world, specifically with biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease with the Alzheimer's disease
Yeah,
neuroimaging.
for sure that she could give you your discount.
I'm sorry, is this?
Tony, you can mute.
Oh, sorry.
You can mute Otis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There he
because I keep
goes.
thinking, do I have something that's talking? No, okay. And we're going to talk about the trajectory and the timing and a little bit about other dementias at the end. And then we'll talk a little bit about risk factors and prevention because it's not too late, folks. It's not too late. We can still try to make a difference. And then we'll talk about treatment, which is where the cutting edge is kind of working now. So, first of all, it's not like cognitive aging is new. If you look back, you can find accounts of something that sounds at least like mild cognitive impairment. So if you read far enough back, the precepts of the Vizier Ptahhotep, I don't know how to pronounce that, but probably no one else does, from 2200 BC, he said, the progress of age changes into senility. Decay falls upon man, and decline takes the place of youth. A vexation weighs upon him every day. Sight fails, the ear becomes deaf, his strength dissolves without ceasing. The mouth is silent, speech fails him, the mind decays, remembering not the day before. And then a paper fairly recently in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, these two people at USC looked through piles of ancient Greek and Roman writing for descriptions of old people that sound like they might have had AD. And surprisingly, they found almost nothing. A lot that sounded like mild cognitive impairment, short-term memory loss, but few with the kind of severe decline followed by death. So, who knows? Maybe Alzheimer's is sort of a newish thing. So the official case definition came from a guy named Alois Alzheimer in 1907, and he published a case report of a woman who had severe impairment and then post-mortem findings of brain damage that included cortical atrophy, so the brain shrinks, amyloid plaques of beta amyloid, kind of like gluey crap in the little plaques, and neurofibrillary tangles where the nerves had their little fibers were kind of stuck together and tangled. But clinically, what he reported was that there's short-term memory loss that progressed to include impairment of language, orientation to time and place. And sometimes people also have delusions and eventually physical deterioration and death. And somehow, from 1907, when this was, oh, well, my grandmother's a little senile, and then there's this very weird, rare disease, to, oh my God, I lost my car keys. I must be getting Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came to that, to the point where, my mother came to visit, my parents came to visit, and my mom was complaining because she went to the grocery store and she forgot the grocery list and she only remembered 9 of the 10 items. And I was like, no, that is not Alzheimer's disease, you know. Um, but how did we sort of get to where we think anytime anything goes wrong? Well, I actually can claim partial credit for this. In East Boston, we had a population-based study of people 65 and older. East Boston is like a geographically circumscribed area. It's where if you've ever flown into Logan Airport, it's on this little, almost an island. It's a peninsula. And it happened that their only real healthcare source was a Harvard University Medical School outpost there that was a clinic. So people were pretty cooperative, and they actually were able to get virtually everyone 65 and older to participate in population-based study. As part of that, they had both an interview and they gave them a simple memory test. They tell them a story. 3 children were alone in a house and the house caught on fire. A brave fireman broke a window and rescued the children. All the children were safe with only minor injuries. I get a perfect score on this. But there were people who couldn't remember different parts of it. And then we would tell it to them a little later. And there were people who would say, what story? Then there are people the next year when you come back, are you going to tell me the story about the firemen again and the brave children? So we did a sample of these people, and we oversampled people with poor memory, the ones who couldn't remember all the pieces, and then took everyone. That was about 400, I think it's 467 people, and they were all seen by a top Harvard neurologist, and who diagnosed whether there was dementia, probable AD. And then we projected the results back to the East Boston population using statistical methods. Waves hand.
Laurel,
Yeah.
can you say you oversampled? What
Yeah,
what did you
we
mean
took
by that?
essentially everyone with poor memory, but we only took a smaller percentage of the people with good memory. And the reason for that is we wanted to do further studies to understand the risk factors, and for having adequate statistical power, we kind of wanted equal numbers of people with Alzheimer's and with normal function. And the way to do that was to take a lot of the people with poor memory and not so many of the ones with good memory, but random. Does that make sense?
Actually, no, but I'll just trust you on it. I mean,
Well,
if you oversample the ones with bad memory, then aren't you tilting the study? That's what I'm not
oh, yes,
understanding.
yes. But that's why then when you try to estimate back to the population, you do a weighted summary. So when you project back to the population, you weight each side by how many there are in the population. So it's like a weighted average. And it's a little tricky because it was a little fancier than that. But basically, if you know that only 5% of the population had poor memory, you multiply their results as if, you treat them as if they were a larger sample. So there's a little statistical magic that goes into that.
Laurel, I have a question too. So
Yeah.
these numbers look high, the percentages. Are these numbers true? Would those hold true in a general population now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we are going to get to that because, yeah, 10% of people in our East Boston population, and they were high. It's only 3% in the younger age group, but it was close to half, over 85. And they didn't just look high to you, they looked high to the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it took us about a year and a half to get this paper published. So first they said the statistician was crazy. Then they said the neurologist was crazy, and we're like, hello, it's Harris. Harris is the top guy. And finally they said, well, it's East Boston. It's all the Italians. It's it was heavily populated with people, some first generation who didn't speak much English. But we have replicated that study in many places now. It was replicated in Chicago. It's been replicated in many countries around the world, including, Nigeria, China, the Netherlands fairly early on. So all over, and the numbers are pretty high many places, though not all.
Do
And
you
we
correct?
projected back to the population of the US. So we then did another weighted estimate back to the US population. And in 1990, we published an estimate that there were, or based on the 1990 census, there were 4 million people with Alzheimer's disease. That is the single most cited number I have ever come up with in 60 years of medical research. And in fact, that was the number that got the money flowing into Alzheimer's research, that and the fact that it was around the time when Reagan finally admitted that he had Alzheimer's. And
But
Congress started appropriating a lot of money because they're like, oh my God, all the old people in Congress start getting spooked. Oh, am I going to lose? Yeah. So this had a huge impact and a lot of publicity going on.
Laurel,
Yeah.
was it adjusted for race and sex? And
Yes.
that brings up the question
Yes.
of now, can you not adjust for race and sex because of the woke, anti-woke movement?
Um, we still adjust for race and sex, and we were able to get better estimates for the US when we did Chicago study, because that was also population based and included a lot of African Americans, of whom there were virtually none in East Boston. They probably would have been chased out had there been any. But the the numbers, yeah, we adjust for that, and we still do this, and we still do statistically appropriate weighting, but we can't say that our study is designed specifically to study an underrepresented population. We can study them, but we can't put in the grant application, and the journals still know, how to do it right. It's just that you have to be careful dealing with the hierarchy at NIH. Okay. Um, this is just to show, this is the population updated prevalence estimates using the 2000 census. And as we'll see later on, these numbers are shifting. We'll see there's some improvement, and we'll talk about why. But again, this is based on work that we did in Chicago. So what does Alzheimer's disease look like? And I don't know, this is a little fuzzy, but this is work from my group here at Davis, but looking at national recruiting for the the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. And participants and informants were each asked about symptoms. And then, because they were asked over a period of time, every couple of years for a while, we were able to estimate what symptom was noticed first by both the participant and by an informant, like a spouse or child. So everybody reported that remembering where objects have been placed is the first thing that they noticed didn't seem right. So that's where my car keys are. But the participants' perceptions were rather different from the informant. The participant recalled the word finding. Oh, I can't find the right word in conversation, or the name of something, and remembering that you already told someone something. So they said I already told them that set of symptoms is very early on. But the informant says, oh, they don't remember that we had that conversation a few days later. And what's called executive function, the ability to do two things at once. They can't concentrate, they can't multitask, and they can't get back to something after being interrupted, which is also kind of executive function and attention. And then, this is forgetting the name of objects and keeping organized. So these are just to give you a sense of some of the symptoms that are reported. So that's what it looks like from the outside, when you report what my symptoms are. From the inside, what does it look like? What happens to your brain? So we have different ways of looking at the brain. Imaging you can do when people are alive. And on the left, you see images of brains of people with and without Alzheimer's. So we have a normal person, and you notice that the outer layer of the brain, the cortex, is pretty tight. They're the little sulci, the little openings here are close together. But as the disease progresses from mild through moderate into severe, the cortex shrinks. So our brain, the outer layer of the cortex is crumpled. It's like a piece of paper or something that's all crumpled up, because that gives you more surface area, more to work with. If you were a lower animal, it would be smoother. But that folding, the little gaps here are now bigger. The cortex itself is shrinking, and it can shrink substantially, as much as 30-40% in late stage disease. And this is what Lois Alzheimer noticed on pathology exam of the brain of the woman who had early onset Alzheimer's. And here we see neurofibrillary tangles. So that's these sort of dark streaks, dark purple streaks. Different stains show up different features. And when I was first starting in Alzheimer's research, I kept asking so many questions about the neuropathology, and they say, oh, we look at a random section. I say, what do you mean random? Because that means something to statisticians. Well, we slide it around till it looks interesting. I'm like, So I had to go do the baby neuropathology course that they give the medical students, so I would understand. You go in and they show you the refrigerator full of brains, and then how you slice them and stain them, and you have to go with the dual controls and learn. You can actually now do some of this yourself if you like. We have my neuropathologist colleague, Brittany Ducker, has a research project that has a citizen science component where you can log on and get trained in how to identify amyloid plaques. And that includes both the cord plaques, these guys over here with the little dot in the middle, the solid core, and the guys on the right here that are cerebral, they're amyloid angiopathy. So this is like around a blood vessel, amyloid has accumulated. And over here we have diffuse plaque. So that's amyloid, but it's kind of like fuzzy, like a cloud. And if you want to go try this out yourself, you can go to betacatchers.com and play with looking at plaques and tangles, or plaques at any rate. So those are with dead brains, but we actually have even better tools now to look at brains.
Laurel,
Yeah.
Laurel, what? I'm sorry. What is amyloid? What is it?
It's beta amyloid. It's I don't think it's a protein. It's kind of a gluey substance that it's present normally in your brain, but normally it's cleared out. And your cerebrospinal fluid is supposed to clear it out and put it into the cerebrospinal fluid, and basically clean it out. When you're sleeping at night, that's one of the things that happens, is it gets the janitorial staff comes through your brain, as it were, and it's supposed to get cleared out. But if it isn't getting cleared out properly, it can clog up your brain, basically. So it's supposed to get dissolved out and removed. So MRI, like the pictures we saw of the size and the structure of the brain, you can see the atrophy, but you can also see damage to blood vessels and whether someone's had a stroke, which is another potential cause of dementia, and something that you can rule out. And in particular, we want to know whether the hippocampus is intact. That's a little tiny organ sort of in the lower middle of your brain that is one of the major things that takes care of short-term memory and saving things, and kind of like a little signaling system for saving memories. And if that starts shrinking or showing damage, that's associated with memory loss. And then positron emission tomography, PET imaging, we use radioactive tracers that bind to specific things in the brain. So you can have things that bind to amyloid, like the plaques that we just saw, and it shows where they are. If there are a whole bunch of them in the hippocampus, that's probably bad. Um, there are different regions of interest, and then tau is another sign of brain damage, and that is associated with things like the neurofibrillary tangles. And there are newer tracers that are not yet in research, in use outside of research. There's a tracer that binds to synuclein. Alpha-synuclein is a pathology that's associated with Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. So these are sort of things that are used to be just research, but now you can get amyloid imaging and find out if your brain has amyloid, and that's one of the screening tools for whether you should get amyloid targeting agents. So here's, you can get it now, definitive diagnosis that there's amyloid even before pathology. At the time we did East Boston, you had to die to get a definitive diagnosis so we could look at your brain. But now we can do this with living people. And this is an example of what amyloid scans look like. So that we have a tracer that binds to amyloid, and if the concentration is high in an area, it turns red. So here are negative scans. And these are looking at the brain from different things, like looking from the top, looking from the side of your head, and looking from your face or back. And you can see in the person who has a lot of amyloid, you see a lot of amyloid in the frontal areas here, the frontal cortex. And you can see the amyloid is much higher for this person with Alzheimer's. The Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging initiative started in 2004 and has enrolled thousands of people who, I don't know if anybody here is enrolled in ADNI, but participants get a lot of clinical testing. They have blood samples drawn, they get genetics, and they get brain imaging and fluid samples, cerebrospinal fluid, and blood vessels. And we did an amazing thing. We make data available basically in real time as soon as it goes through quality control, including images, raw images, though we now de-identify them, so you can't look at it and say, oh my gosh, that skull looks just exactly like the shape of Tony Johnson's head. So we make everybody kind of look like they have the same shape head with magic computing AI stuff. And you can also get the summary measures, like how much amyloid there is by region of interest, and it's scaled, so it's from 0 to 100, and scaled to represent you reflect your brain size. So, and you can actually, people can download this, and many, thousands and thousands and thousands of people have downloaded. There are something like 5,000 publications. Maybe it's up to 8,000 now. I forget how many, but thousands of publications have used our data to try to better understand Alzheimer's disease. We have proteomics. We have, just amazing data. So this is a huge, important study. And I was asked at the very beginning if I would lead the statistical core. At first I said no, and then I realized this is going to be the biggest study in Alzheimer's in the world. And so anyway, I'm still the director, although my first person I recruited to Davis when I came as a faculty member, Danielle Harvey, was actually a Don Bentley student about 30 years after me, 25 or 30 years after. And she did her doctorate under another Don Bentley student, Ron Thisted, at University of Chicago. Not a coincidence. I wrote to all my Pomona friends as well as advertising and said, if you have a really smart doctoral student just finishing up, I want to hire them and I'll promise to be a good mentor just like Bentley. So Danielle is the co-director and will take over when I step down in a year or two. So we also have fluid biomarkers. People get spinal taps, which isn't as bad as it sounds, I'm told. And cerebrospinal fluid also reflects what's happening in your brain. So the amyloid in cerebrospinal fluid goes down if you have dementia because it's being sequestered in the brain. It's not getting cleared out and flushed out. So it goes down as amyloid starts piling up in the brain. And your tau goes up. Isn't that interesting? So, but of course, this requires getting a spinal fluid sample. So it would be really nice if you could do all this from just blood samples. Blood draws are cheap, easy. You can collect them at little. Basically, the blood draw places are almost like kiosks now locally. You can go in and get a blood draw and save it and send it off to a lab. So this is much less invasive, and we're now at the point where they're becoming clinically useful. And they're kind of, as we talked about with the FDA, to get something approved as a biomarker, you have to demonstrate to the FDA its use. Otherwise, it's not clinically approved, and you can't bill Medicare for it or whatever. But
Laurel,
yeah,
Laurel, I hope this isn't just my bad brain, but if you've told me what amyloid is made of, is it a what is it? What is it actually?
um, that's a very good question.
It's nice of you to say that.
I just looked it up. It's a protein.
Yeah, it is
It's
a
a
protein, but it's
it's a protein.
what we're interested in is a fragment from a larger protein. So it's a little chunk of protein. And the thing is, it's sticky because proteins can bind to things. And so the larger protein breaks down, and these little beta amyloid, the smaller pieces, are kind of sticky crud. And if your brain is working properly, your brain's physiology, you should have fluid in your fluid. You should have things that bind to the beta amyloid and can clear it out, and then it can get absorbed and basically carried away and excreted or whatever. Does
Okay,
that help?
Laurel,
Yeah.
if it's of any help, what I looked up, it said they're abnormal clumps of misfolded protein fragments,
Yes.
specifically. So they're not just
They're-
any old
right.
protein.
Right. They get folded wrong, so they can't bind to the thing that gets them out. That's right. Exactly. They're
Okay.
misfolded, and because if they're properly in their original state, they can be cleaned out. But if they get misfolded, then the thing that binds them that can clean them out isn't. The way that proteins work is they're very long chains that are all folded up into little shapes, and they wind up folded up, so they have little like holes in them, as it were, openings where you can bind. And if they get folded wrong, then they can either bind where they're not supposed to or not bind where they are. Does that kind of make sense? So amyloid is misfolded, and one of the really rare diseases that can cause brain damage is a Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is a version of it is the mad cow thing, and that's caused by prions, which are very misfolded protein fragments, but they get misfolded in such a way that they can accumulate and they pile up, and they can actually, quote, replicate, because they can cause other pieces to misfold. They're like a cascade of misfolded things. Someone I know who was a neurologist developed Creutzfeldt-Jakob and self-diagnosed, and I believe he actually committed suicide. He died before the disease got to its absolute worst. And I believe he committed suicide with the help of his wife, who was also a physician, but I don't know for sure. I went to his wake, and the strangest thing was the neuropathologist who did the postmortem was having conversations about what kind of protection she used, and was it really Creutzfeldt-Jakob and not mad cow. So it was
Laurel,
interesting funeral conversation.
can I ask another question?
Sure.
In one of the things I read somewhere, they were talking about new Alzheimer's tests, and one was Alexis, it's Elecsys, and it was checking for tau 181, and Lumipulse, which was checking for amyloid. And these were supposed to be not as invasive tests, but when I asked, I went to my doctor, and that day I got a new student who was going to interview me, and she spent all this time online trying to figure out what they were, and she wasn't quite sure, and she didn't think they were available.
Yeah.
You know anything about them?
Yeah, there are a zillion candidates for less invasive biomarkers.
Yeah.
Right now, the chief one appears to be plasma p-tau 217, which is phosphorylated tau that has been phosphorylated at the 217 point on its protein. That means it's had phosphorus stuck on that particular place. And plasma p-tau 217 is useful cross-sectionally and also longitudinally if you see changes in how much plasma p-tau 217 you have. And that is not yet at the stage of being, FDA approved as a biomarker, but we use it in research, and it's one of our screening tools for research. So we're getting there on the less invasive biomarkers. But if you really want, sort of the where are you in the amyloid cascade world, that would be PET imaging right now. Is probably, that's the one that is currently accepted for eligibility to the amyloid targeting agents. So we're sort of we're like, this is all cutting edge, Les. So it's really true that there are a lot of candidate biomarkers, but I don't think too many of them are far enough along to say, oh, they're useful in clinical practice, except potentially p-tau 217. And it has not yet gone through the FDA process. And there are also things like ratios of amyloid to tau, and and there are other potential markers for other diseases. So they're trying to get, for example, markers that will be sensitive to synucleinopathies. So you could do a blood test for Parkinson's or Lewy body. They're the same brain pathology, basically, and you can have Parkinson's, or you can have Parkinsonian dementia, or you can have Lewy body with Parkinsonian symptoms, or pure Lewy body, depending on where it is in your brain. So the key thing is it doesn't happen all at once. And the damage may start as much as 20 years before the diagnosis. So this is a conceptual picture of the amyloid hypothesis, that amyloid is the first thing that goes wrong, and that you could pick that up by your cerebrospinal fluid amyloid going down and your PET amyloid going up. Those are the left-hand curves, and the x-axis represents time and the very onset of pathology. And if you go to someplace like here, you are starting to be able to pick up the signs here in the amyloid world, but the tau in the CSF is only just starting to show then. And the MRI showing atrophy is, oh, why is this? It drives me crazy. Is not yet visible, and there are no symptoms yet. High risk people will start showing symptoms with much earlier in the brain accumulation. What does make high risk? Well, genetics and things like hypertension, and we'll talk a little later about risk factors. But in this green area, you start having signs of mild cognitive impairment, like the short-term forgetting of words or conversations. And way out, farther out, it's dementia. So this is the picture that people think of when they say, oh, it's an amyloid-based disease. But we have done analyses that look at longitudinally at all these measures and suggest that even in ADNI, which tried to recruit people who sounded like Alzheimer's, even in ADNI, about a third of the people were something else because amyloid showed up later. So here's the question for us. All of the people in this room are pushing 80, right? Are we doomed? Are we doomed, right? So if you look, this is population averages. I think this is from the national averages. Is that a question, Douglas? Oh, just your hands. Okay. So episodic memory, that's like remembering the little story. Executive function, that's like you can do two things at once and you remember how to do all the steps to do something and carry them out. And this looks like on average, people go down. And here we are out at 80. And we are at 80 on average, almost a standard deviation below the average for young, healthy people. Icaroni. Are we doomed? Well, here's the thing. Not necessarily, because not everybody goes down. And the picture on the right is from a paper that Bob Wilson at Rush in Chicago and I wrote with some other people, where we looked at smooth curves for individuals and said, sure, a lot of people go down, some very drastically, but a lot of people stay pretty healthy into their 90s and even 100. So how do we get there? And can it really be done? Well, the population level data suggests that yes, there are things that are modifiable. The incidence levels have dropped in the US, so that 10% is down a couple percentage points. European countries also down. There are fewer new cases per year, and it's not an artifact of access or diagnostic paradigm shift. We've looked at that. It really appears that there are things making a difference. And also some populations have lower levels than others. There's some study in some Amazonian tribe, and I think I put the reference in my references, that had like around 1% in their old people when they did, population-based study and had a bunch of people see a neurologist. And the story that I said at the beginning, with not many cases of Alzheimer's per se recorded in ancient Greece, even by, physicians, Hippocrates. So we can't fix our genome. If you inherited a copy of the apolipoprotein E4 allele, you can't fix that, at least at this point, but there are a lot of modifiable risk factors. So here are evidence-supported ways to decrease your risk. Attention, people. Blood pressure is a huge risk factor. And if you control your blood pressure, people who are successfully treated have about the same risk as people who are normal without treatment. I hope everybody here is getting your blood pressure checked regularly and addressing it, because that's the single biggest risk factor that I know of that's modifiable, that affects a lot of people in this country. And we're doing better at addressing that. We also have people avoiding other cardiovascular risk factors, type 2 diabetes, hypercholesteremia, smoking. I doubt that anyone on this conversation smokes. Maybe you did in younger years, but I don't see any of you smoking during this call. So the decrease in smoking has been a contributing factor. Treatment of type 2 diabetes and cholesterol treatment, diet. I'm sure you guys hear a lot of this. Eat healthy, ignore Kennedy Jr.'s recommendations, but the Mediterranean or MIND diet, a lot of fruit and vegetables, whole grains, eat fish, limited red meat. It actually has been shown to be helpful and protective, probably mostly through the pathway of the cardiovascular risk factors, but also reducing inflammation. Exercise, stay active. Walking, whatever, do what you can. Get enough sleep. Sleep is a good thing. Maintain your social connections, because it turns out isolation and loneliness are bad. And learn new things and stay cognitively active. Hello, we're learning new things all the time.
So can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So it said that the incidence in the US was going down.
Mm-hmm.
How is that tied to the number of people who are living longer? But although I do understand that the death rate has also, it's worse than it used to be.
That's a great
Just recently, but I have a number of friends. I was just counting. I know 5 people personally who are 100 or over who are still cognitively sharp. I mean, I know a lot of people who aren't cognitively sharp because I visit elder care places.
Yes.
But I'm impressed that, and just to mention, they're all women. Every single one of them. They're all women. They live alone at age 100. And
Mhm.
so it's possible to do that. And if
Yeah.
you ask them what their magic bullet was, it would be, I have a martini every night, but they're all very socially active.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yeah. They're not isolated, and they probably didn't smoke, most of them, and they
ah,
probably are getting regular medical care of some sort. And they're lucky genetically. But yeah, as far as how do we mathematically deal with the fact that people are getting older and lifespan, all the mathematics of calculating incidence rates and taking account the fact people are getting older or whatever, they're adjusting for all of that statistically. Um, that would be like a whole other class. We teach that. It's fancy. I write papers on it, how to do that. So we can deal with the mathematics of making comparisons legitimately. So that the legitimate comparisons are out there. We know. And yeah, there are people who live a long time and are cognitively intact.
Mhm. Laurel,
Yeah.
Laurel, it's Meredith.
Hi, Meredith.
I read some time ago that the idea of multitasking is incorrect. It's not possible to really multitask in the sense that we mean it when we use that phrase. You
Yes.
can't concentrate on two things at once, is what I read. That you can kind of keep two things going, but neither of them will be
Yeah.
the kind of focus that you'd like to give it.
Yeah, it's essentially switching attention, that you can switch your attention without losing where you were on something else.
Yes, this is what I read. You can switch your attention and you can do that fairly quickly,
Yeah, but
but
that's
you
You
hard.
can't focus on two things at once.
I'm
That's
not so
hard.
sure this isn't a verbal problem because it happens all the time in music where somebody is playing guitar and singing. Those are two completely different cognitive operations. And you can also be playing guitar and singing and wondering when the break is going to come. So, so I'm not so sure these terms, multitasking, are very clear in what they're referring to because it couldn't be more. Paul McCartney plays bass. Bass is, he's got all these lines going on, but he's always also remembering the lyrics and the melody and singing all that stuff and relating the audience. That's all very complicated stuff. And so I'm not sure we can't multitask.
I think it's different than that, Tony. The studies that I saw, they were studying students who brought their laptops with them to class. They look like they're taking notes. They're actually playing video games and answering texts and doing all this other stuff. And then they gave them tests at the end of the class, and they really failed at listening to the lecture. They weren't able
Well,
to do two totally separate things.
I mean, come on, they're not paying attention to both of them. I tell my students this. Listen, I don't. A lot of people get uptight if their students are looking at their phones or their laptop, but I say I don't care. You're an adult. You make up your mind. If you think not paying attention to me is your best program, go for it and see how you do on the test. This is up to you. But no, look, when I say that they can multitask, what I mean is there are different sections of the brain doing different things. If you're trying to verbally, if I'm trying to verbally understand something at the same time I'm doing something that uses the same part of the brain, you're going to get confused. But there's
Yeah.
a lot of things you do where you could automatically, I mean, look, you're chopping vegetables and you're thinking about the party you're going to. I mean, we do this stuff all the time. All I'm saying is I think there needs to be a lot of clarity when we're talking about multitasking and what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, I think that the interesting part is to try to understand where your attention is and um, how many
Tasks.
how many tasks you can do at once where your attention is sufficient that you're doing them at a level that would make that oh, never mind. I can't get the words. I can't get the words to talk about this, but I
Oh
think
my
you know
Yeah.
what
goodness.
I'm trying to say.
I think for myself, what I've noticed is I should never leave the kitchen telling myself that if I take something out to the compost, I will safely not get distracted and forget that I have something cooking. You know what I mean? I get out there by the pool. I got to pull that weed. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I come back in and say, oh my gosh, I was cooking something. So that's what I think the multitasking problem is. And that's a change for me.
So there's an interesting book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman that
Right.
talks about different kinds of cognitive processing that your brain does, and things like playing the bass line that might be automatic and are done at one level don't necessarily interfere with more complex thoughts that can be carried out in other areas of the brain. So it's an
You know,
interesting
people,
book, and we're
hey,
getting way off
Brian,
of Laurel's topic.
people have seriously questioned Kahneman's conclusions from his research, and I think that I wouldn't trust him to, throw me a baseball from
Well,
what I've read. So,
I'm not sure you could catch it if you were at least on the way to the compost pit.
well,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I think attention is something that this is an area
All right,
that's
well, that's something we could talk about at another conversation.
And it's all fascinating. I think neuropsychology and how the brain works and how we live our lives with our minds kind of guiding us through them or not is fascinating. And yes, we could have and maybe this is a topic where if we have some of our people who've trained more in psychology, it might be fun to have some conversations about that at some point. So yeah, anyway, I'll just tell a little bit about what happens. Suppose you do get Alzheimer's. What are the current treatments? And this is where the cutting edge is also taking place. We have for about the last 30 years, I guess, had some treatments available, 25 or 30 years. The frontline therapy is cholinesterase inhibitors, Aricept, galantamine, rivastigmine patches. And for a while there, you couldn't turn on your TV without hearing or pick up a magazine without seeing ads. Are you forgetting things? Do you need Aricept? Ask your doctor. I have to say, one of the things that drives me crazy is that you can now advertise medications on TV. It didn't used to be that way, but um, and the thing is that they support the neuronal connections. They do slow progression. You might get 18 months or a couple of years out of this as some improvement in behavior and cognition. They do have side effects. Diarrhea, nausea, sleep disturbance are kind of the most common. The sort of second line therapy that people often get is Namenda or Memantine, and that does include some dizziness and confusion. Sometimes it's given on top of the cholinesterase inhibitors, but it does help for a while. It's symptom relieving. It's not targeting the actual mechanism of the disease. Does not deal with the underlying biology. And this is where the cool stuff is happening now. The challenging stuff is we talked last time about monoclonal antibodies, and we have amyloid targeting monoclonal antibodies. So amyloid as a protein fragment, the beta amyloid, can be targeted, treated as an antigen and targeted by antibodies and attempted to actually remove it from the brain. And there are a couple of approved ones now, lecanemab, donanemab, and they both reduce amyloid. You can actually see it on the brain imaging, and you get some cognitive improvement, not a huge amount, but some. But they also potentially have serious side effects, including some brain inflammation that is not common, but it's worrisome. So this is a serious thing. Plus the fact that the infusion is, it's an invasive thing. You got to go to the doctor and get an infusion. There's some speculation that that's what's going on with Trump when he shows up with bruising, because often they are infused into your wrist or hand as well as your arm. So there's speculation that Trump is getting lecanemab or donanemab. Who knows? So that's for amyloid basis things, but really old people, it's rare when you look at brain pathology to find brains that have only amyloid. If you look at really old people with clinical Alzheimer's, clinically diagnosed Alzheimer's, most people, past to 85, 90 are going to have more than one thing happening in their brain. Vascular disease, so that's strokes, vascular dementia, and they often have the same clinical symptoms as Alzheimer's. They can be diagnosed by imaging, and you can have sudden onset like a stroke, but not always. It can just accumulate. It can also show up from inflammation, so inflammatory disease can cause vascular damage. Lewy body disease, that's a version of alpha-synucleinopathy like Parkinson's. Symptoms can include sleep disturbance, delusions, hallucinations, problems with executive function. This is what my mother had the last year or two of her life. She was almost 98, and probably the most frustrating thing with her was the delusions, because they were all scary. Sometimes people have nice benign delusions, like there are these little children who are coming to visit, or there's a dog over there on the sofa. But my mother's were things like, I got carjacked about once a week on the way home from the retirement community 5 minutes away. And just, scary stuff. But fortunately, there are treatments for that, like the atypical antipsychotics. She was on Seroquel, which worked. There's also a black box warning about them in old people, and I had to, her poor doctor got a nasty gram from the practice monitors every month, and I gave him a little script to send back that said, you know what, I'm not worried about her having a stroke in the next 10 years. I'm more worried about the delusion problem, and this is a low dose, and there's like a 5% added risk of stroke. Frontotemporal dementia is one of the scary, really, really scary things. I don't know whether any of you have known people who had this. The changes in personality and behavior are very hard for family and caregivers. Language can be lost in various ways. There's been some speculation in the press that some of Trump's language issues may have something to do with FTD. So there's a lot of other potential pathologies. Then there are weird things like Creutzfeldt-Jakob and other unusual things. But it's personal to me. I don't know how many of you, if any of you remember our classmate, Joanne Scott. She was my very close friend. And her parents died quite young when we were just out of college. And we didn't know their history, but she was homozygous for the apolipoprotein E4 allele, which means she basically had early onset disease that would have been very hard to prevent. She started having symptoms which were initially attributed to menopause, like, hello, of course, that's brain fog, but then depression. But finally, I said, this is wrong. She went to see my colleague, Charlie DeCarli here, and was diagnosed, and then she was treated at Stanford. She was very lucky that her husband was the best caregiver I've ever seen. But there wasn't much to be done. She died in 2019, fortunately, before the pandemic made it very hard. My dad, on the other hand, Les, with your comments about people, my dad lived to be 101 and was cognitively intact. Yay. This is his birthday cake at 101. My nitwit daughter, there's some cognitive impairment in this particular episode, insisted on putting 101 candles on the cake. It took 4 of us to light them. And if you could hear my dad, what he's saying is, I hope you don't expect me to blow all of those out. The woman behind him in the picture, who's kind of in the shadows, is one of his former students who came to his 101st birthday just as a, so he was, he was pretty cool. He was still intact. And my mom lived to be almost 98. The last, I'd say 2 years, she suffered from Lewy body dementia with delusions. So who knows, I could be around a while. So that is my set of thoughts about Alzheimer's and dementia, and what I've been doing since I was at Harvard, went to Harvard in 1987 and started working on Alzheimer's disease. And I've been working on that area ever since.
This is great, Laurel. How fast do you think things are changing? When we hit 85 as a group, where do you think therapies will be at that point? Or, yeah.
Boy, that's a great question. I think that we will have amyloid tau combination therapy approved by then, because we're starting to enroll people in phase 1, I think maybe phase 2 clinical trials of amyloid tau combination agents. And if they are successful, then I think we'll have more targeted agents. I'm hoping that we'll have something for Lewy body and Parkinson's, because again, with monoclonal antibodies, you can basically come up with designer drugs that target specific pathologies. So again, this is partly why I wanted to talk about immunology first, is that that's the underlying basic science that is making possible our advances in therapy. And in principle, if our NIH were up and functioning the way it ought to, we could come up with a vaccine and treatment for the new variant of Ebola in a matter of months. We have the basic science. But of course, you have to fund the basic science first. This is all grounded on many years of basic science and brain pathology, and doing all the kinds of things we're doing in the amyloid, in ADNI. So if you want to do a phase 1 trial, to do a large scale trial of, say, an amyloid tau targeting agent, how do you know if it's working? You need to enroll a lot of people, because there's a lot of noise in the system.
How do you get to enroll in one of these tests?
The first thing to do is look online and see. NIH maintains a list of clinical, I think it's clinicaltrials.gov, maintains a list of clinical trials in which they say what the eligibility requirements are. And ADNI for All, our current and hopefully getting renewed, we're trying to enroll more people from rural areas, so and more people with lower education. So all of us are not so much eligible for that, but the clinicaltrials.gov can tell you, and then you can talk to your local doctors. To be enrolled in one of these trials, they need to confirm that you have something in your brain to target. So you'd have to, one of the enrollment criteria would be to get PET scanning. But we're also now, because of the not yet approved for clinical use, but getting there, p-tau 217, we're screening for eligibility using blood samples as well as clinical. So we're trying to, yeah. So and there's a lot of clinical research going on. I'm an external advisory board member for several Alzheimer's disease centers. I just rotated off UCSF, and I'm still on Pitt, I think, and I'm on Washington University in St. Louis, and I rotated off UC San Diego a couple years ago. And of course, I'm still in Davis.
Laurel.
Yeah.
I remember several years back when there was they talked about plaques and tangles, and there was a debate as to which one was the most prominent cause. And there was the plaque group and the tangle group. It seems to me, based on what you've told us today, that it's actually both. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's both, and I think I think it's heterogeneous. There are clearly people who have dementia that looks from the outside like Alzheimer's, but you scan them and they don't have that much plaque. But they may have tangles with something else going on. My mother initially was thought to have Alzheimer's. We never actually did a PET scan, and I didn't get a postmortem, but I'm pretty sure that she really had Lewy body clinically, and she had no memory problems. I'd go to see her every day, and she would say, "Oh, your father came by this morning, and he brought M&Ms. See, I haven't finished them yet." When she was the last year, she was in a special dementia care unit, and because my dad at 98 was not able to take care of her when she was physically. So yeah, I don't. There's plaques, there's tangles. I think they're both playing a role, and it may vary.
Laurel,
Yeah.
Laurel, is there any real research that shows any causality related to amyloid or tau? It seems like it surprisingly, after decades and decades of research, this is still associative rather than causative.
Well, I mean, no, there are animal studies. You can change certain genetic features. You can have, you can make amyloid accumulating mice, right? By doing so. So clearly there are genetic risk factors, and there are suggestions that inflammation and diet can play a role in this, at least associative, and you can increase the rate in mice, but mice are not a perfect model for humans. Interestingly, dogs get dementia, but we don't really know as much about that. Have you ever seen elderly dogs who get confused and have memory problems?
Yeah.
That happens.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about when you were just talking about the inflammation connection? Because I'm still confused when they talk about, say, arthritic inflammation. Is that the same inflammation we're talking about that does brain damage?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what should you do if you have arthritis?
Inflammatory process is thought to be, and there's also a gut brain connection.
Right. I was reading about that recently.
Yeah. And there was a suggestion for a while that say taking anti-inflammatories like NSAIDs could be protective against Alzheimer's because it would reduce inflammation.
Yeah.
Studies suggesting that people with some you know autoimmune condition that increased might be at higher risk or less risk, or if you take sufficient. So I don't think any of that is really at the level of saying, oh, you should take NSAIDs because it'll reduce the inflammation and reduce brain damage. But there are other things that foster inflammation, and things that damage your blood vessels, because inflammation in the blood vessels. So if you think about all the things that might be associated with vascular disease, like cardiovascular disease, anything you can do that reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease and blood vessel inflammation is a good thing.
Laurel, I've been thinking a lot about inflammation lately. The advice for moms with little babies have changed about when you start to get really worried about how high a very small person's temperature has gotten to be. And basically, what I've heard more recently is, well, when your temperature goes up, that means that your red blood cells are
The white blood cells.
the white blood cells are working hard, and that you don't necessarily want to reduce their ability to gather around and fight against whatever it is that's affecting you. Okay. And I got from that the idea that, my gosh, when you have inflammation, that means something's going to work inside you. It can't be all bad to have
It's not.
inflammation, or else it would never happen.
No, inflammation, like if you cut yourself in the areas gets inflamed around it, it's a good local inflammation, disease fighting, cytokines is 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 good, but at some point it's supposed to get cleared up and stop and go away. And you're not supposed to get sepsis when the inflammation takes over and your whole body is getting basically, cytokine storms or whatever. And so the problem with sepsis is you're getting overwhelmed with uh, the with the infection. It hasn't succeeded, and your body is now fighting back everything it's got throwing at it. And sometimes, of course, you get out of control because there's something wrong with the control system. So you want to be able to fight disease. If you have flu, you want to run a bit of a fever. Maybe you take some Tylenol. So if you're totally miserable, you don't want to be, running a temperature of 105 and damaging yourself from that. But that your body is capable of mounting an immune response is a good thing. If you get your vaccine and you feel local soreness in your arm, and maybe you run a temperature of 100, 101 for 2 days, I'm okay with that, right?
Yeah.
It's chronic inflammation. I think that's the problem, and autoimmune responses and things like that.
Yeah, those are chronic inflammation. Yeah. I'm not talking about chronic inflammation. I'm talking about when inflammation comes on you. If you're a mom with a small child, they don't necessarily want you to pour Tylenol for babies down their throat right away. They want you to just wait and watch. And I think that's because when your body's mounting, it's like the archers who were on the tops of the cliffs and were able to keep the attack from many, many more fighters down because they were able to do something that not everybody can do, which was hit them with their arrows. And so at times you have the attack that you're fighting off. I mean, you're doing the right thing by fighting off this attack
Yeah.
on your body. I know I'm not making any sense, but I think you
No, it
guys
makes
know what
sense
I'm trying to say.
that you need to have the immune system especially that adaptive immune system that recognizes a specific situation that needs to be addressed and brings in, the heavy lifting, brings in the B cells and brings in cytokines and does its thing. But you also want the T cells, the helper T cells, the T4s, or the CD4 count cells, to say, okay, it's done, it's over. You can go away, you can go home and just set your memory aside to do it if you ever need it again. So you want this to be like a short-term as needed thing. And it's very weird that the connection with diet, I think we're just starting to understand more how diet connects up to this, and how the gut microbiome, and this is where if Dan were here, he could tell you a lot more, because Dan is on the board of the International Prebiotic and Probiotic Scientific Association, and he's been doing prebiotic and probiotic research now for a lot of years. So he's very up on that. So I had to take antibiotics when I had pneumonia last fall, and I had to ask Dan. I said, "Okay, remind me again which of the probiotic supplements is the right one to take after I've had antibiotics for pneumonia," which I was very grateful for, because whatever it was very susceptible to the antibiotics, and the horrible cough went away. Poof. Um, so so yeah, but then then you want to have a healthy uh, gut microbiome too, because that apparently, and that research is sort of ongoing. We don't really know all the connection, but there is a gut uh, brain connection, that your brain influences your gut and your digestion, and in return it influences your brain in ways we are just beginning to learn about.
Okay.
Very. So
Great,
thank you.
Laurel. This is really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I am um, not a biologist, and I'm uh, not a clinician. So, my apologies that I know all the stuff about this, but I try to keep up. For what it's worth, the international Alzheimer's meetings this summer, the Alzheimer's meetings this summer will be cutting edge, and I'm planning to attend virtually. I'm not going to London this time, and I will try to report back if anything interesting comes up.
Great.
New stuff. And meanwhile, thank you guys for being such a great audience and having so many good questions. I just feel so blessed that I have this social connection with all of you and people I otherwise wouldn't get to see. Alice, you should talk sometime about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree, Laurel. It's a great group, and hope we can continue it. So, uh, this is about as long a recording as we want to do. So, I'm going to go ahead and if you think you're done, Laurel, we'll call it quits for today. And what
Thanks,
did I say
Laurel.
Oh yeah,
next
I
time?
am
But
done, and I'm going to create I have a reference list I kind of put together, so I will share the references that are not terribly complete, but they can point you to more reading for those of you who are you start reading, and then the little trail of references takes you everywhere,
yeah,
breadcrumbs.
Well, thanks, Laurel. This has
Thank
been
you.
a
it's been
fantastic
great.
story.
It's really been great. So we'll see you all on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And meanwhile, uh, go protest.